Let me tell you something about men that most people misunderstand. A man may hear many words from many people, but there are certain words that stay with him. Not because they are loud, but because they are meaningful. Not because they are emotional, but because they are intentional. And when a woman learns how to communicate from a place of confidence, she can communicate effectively and confidently. Clarity and self-worth, she doesn't have to chase a man's respect, she naturally commands it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to understand how a man sees a woman, you have to understand one thing first: men don't just respond to beauty, and they don't just respond to attention. A man responds deeply to how a woman communicates her value. Not in a loud way, not in a demanding way, but in a calm, confident, self-assured way that tells him without confusion, I know who I am. And when a woman learns how to speak from that place, something shifts in how a man perceives her. She doesn't have to chase respect. She doesn't have to beg for attention. She doesn't have to force emotional connection. Her words alone begin to position her differently in his mind. Now listen closely, because this is where most people miss the point. It's not just what she says, it's how she says it, and more importantly, the energy behind it. A man can hear the same sentence from two different women and feel completely different about it. And one might sound emotional, uncertain, and reactive. The other might sound grounded, calm, and secure. And the difference in how he responds will be massive, because men are not only listening to words, they are reading emotional energy through those words. When a woman speaks with clarity, she creates structure, and men respect structure. Confusion pushes a man away, but clarity pulls him into awareness. So when a woman says things that reflect certainty about herself, she's saying she's confident in her abilities, she's confident in her decisions, and she's confident in her overall well-being. She is not just communicating, she is positioning herself as someone who understands her own value. Now think about this carefully. A man doesn't respect a woman because she demands it. He respects a woman because she demonstrates it. And one of the strongest demonstrations of self-respect is how she speaks about her own needs, her own feelings, and her own expectations. When a woman calmly expresses appreciation, it hits differently in a man's mind. Because most men don't hear appreciation consistently in their lives. So when a woman says something simple but meaningful like, I notice what you do, or I appreciate your effort, it lands deeper than people realize. Not because it is exaggerated, but because it is sincere. Men don't need constant praise, but they do respond strongly to genuine acknowledgement. It creates emotional reinforcement. It makes him feel seen, not just used or expected to perform. And when a man feels seen, he becomes more emotionally present in return. But there is something even more powerful than appreciation, and that is self-definition. When a woman says things that define how she expects to be treated, she is not controlling a man. She is revealing her standard. And standards are not negotiable in the mind of a high-value man. They are respected. Even if he needs time to adjust to them, he remembers them. So when a woman calmly says, I value consistency, or I need honesty and communication, she is not arguing. She is not threatening. She is simply expressing the environment where she can thrive emotionally. And that changes everything, because now the man is no longer guessing what she wants. He understands it clearly. And clarity reduces unnecessary conflict. Now let's go deeper into tone, because tone carries more weight than words alone. A woman can say the right thing in the wrong tone and lose its impact completely. But when she speaks with calm confidence, without aggression, without emotional pressure, without insecurity, she exudes a sense of calm and clarity. Her message becomes powerful without needing volume. Men respect calm strength, not emotional chaos, not panic-driven communication, not repeated emotional outbursts, but calm, grounded expression. Because calm communication signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is attractive to a man who is serious about connection. Now, I want you to understand something very important. When a woman constantly reacts emotionally, instead of responding calmly, a man stops focusing on her message and starts focusing on her reaction. But when she speaks from calm self-assurance, he listens to the message instead of being distracted by emotion. And that is where influence begins. Because influence is not about control. It is about clarity combined with composure. Now let's talk about value expression. When a woman speaks in a way that reflects self-worth, she changes how a man positions her in his mind. She is no longer someone to be managed emotionally. She becomes someone to be respected mentally. And men treat those two categories very differently. A woman who says, I like how I feel when there is honesty between us, is not accusing. She is describing emotional safety. And emotional safety is something every man understands at a core level, even if he does not always express it openly. Because men also want peace. They also want stability. They also want connection without confusion. So when a woman communicates her emotional needs without drama, without accusation, without instability, she becomes easier to respect, not harder to deal with. Now, here is something many people don't realize. And a man doesn't just fall for how a woman looks at him. He falls deeper for how she makes him feel about himself when she speaks. If she speaks from insecurity, he feels pressure. If she speaks from anger, he feels resistance. But if she speaks from confidence and warmth, he feels drawn in, because that combination is rare. Confidence without arrogance, warmth without desperation, clarity without aggression. That balance creates emotional attraction that is not easily replaced. And let me be clear, this is not about manipulation or strategy. This is about emotional intelligence. It is about a woman understanding that her words are not just communication tools, they are reflections of her inner world. So when a woman knows her value, she doesn't over-explain it. She expresses it. She doesn't argue for it. She lives it through her communication. She doesn't chase validation. She stands in clarity. And that is what makes a man see her differently. Not because she is trying to be seen, but because her presence, her tone, and her words naturally communicate self-respect. At the end of the day, a man remembers how a woman made him feel about himself, but he also remembers how she carried herself when she spoke. And when her communication reflects calm confidence, emotional awareness, and self-worth, she doesn't just get attention, she gets recognition. And there is something powerful that happens in the mind of a man when a woman communicates emotional standards clearly, without anger, without confusion, and without losing her self-respect. It changes how he processes her. It changes how he values her. And most importantly, it changes how he chooses to treat her moving forward. Because men may not always say it out loud, but they are constantly evaluating emotional safety. Not just physical attraction, not just chemistry, but emotional safety. A man pays attention to whether a woman brings peace into his life or unnecessary chaos, whether communication feels grounded or unstable, whether conversations feel clear or emotionally unpredictable. And this is where words become powerful. Now listen carefully, because this is something most people misunderstand. A woman does not gain respect from a man by explaining her worth repeatedly. She gains respect by expressing her standards once clearly, calmly, and consistently reinforcing them through her communication style. When a woman says things like, "I need honesty in communication," or "I value consistency in how we connect," she is not asking for permission. She is defining emotional structure, and structure creates stability in a man's mind. Even if he doesn't fully adjust immediately, he understands what kind of energy is required to stay in alignment with her. And that understanding matters. Because when a man knows a woman's emotional standards, he is no longer guessing. And guesswork is where most misunderstandings begin. Guesswork creates confusion. Confusion creates distance. But clarity removes unnecessary emotional noise. Now here's where it becomes even more important. The tone in which a woman expresses her needs determines whether a man feels respected or pressured. If she expresses her needs through frustration, accusation, or emotional overload, he hears tension. But if she expresses her needs through calm confidence, he hears maturity, and men respond to maturity. Because maturity does not feel like control. It feels like direction. It feels like emotional grounding. It feels like stability. So when a woman calmly says, "I feel my best when communication is honest and consistent," she is not attacking him. She is revealing the environment where she thrives emotionally. And a man who is emotionally intelligent understands that this is not a demand, it is clarity. And clarity is powerful in relationships. Now let's go deeper into why this changes how a man sees her. A man respects a woman who does not abandon herself in communication. That means she does not lose her calm just to be understood. She does not raise her emotional volume just to be heard. She does not sacrifice her dignity to prove a point. Instead, she stays grounded while expressing herself. And that grounding creates a psychological effect. It signals emotional strength, because emotional strength is not about being loud or dominant. It is about being steady. It is about being consistent in how you express yourself, even when emotions are involved. And when a woman can do that, a man starts to see her differently, not just as someone he is emotionally involved with, but as someone he respects. Now think about this carefully. A man may be attracted to many women, but he does not respect many women. Attraction can happen quickly, but respect is built through behavior, communication, and emotional presence. And one of the strongest ways a woman builds respect is by not over-explaining herself, because over-explaining often comes from insecurity, not clarity. When a woman feels the need to repeatedly justify her feelings, she unintentionally lowers the emotional impact of her message. But when she expresses herself clearly once without emotional repetition, her words carry weight. Men, notice weight. Now let's talk about emotional reinforcement. When a woman acknowledges a man's effort with sincerity, it creates emotional balance. A simple statement like, "I noticed the effort you put in and I appreciate it," does something powerful in a man's mind. It reinforces positive behavior. And it tells him he is seen, not just expected. And men are deeply influenced by feeling seen, because many men operate in silence. They do things without always expecting recognition. But when recognition comes sincerely, it strengthens emotional connection. It makes him more likely to continue that behavior, not because he is being controlled, but because he feels valued. But here is the balance many people miss. Appreciation does not mean losing standards. A woman can appreciate a man and still hold emotional boundaries. She can acknowledge effort and still expect consistency. She can express warmth and still maintain self-respect. And when those two things exist together, warmth and boundaries, it creates emotional stability that men take seriously. Now let's go deeper into emotional influence. A woman who communicates from calm confidence does not need to compete for attention. She does not need to chase emotional validation. She does not need to constantly prove her worth, because her communication already reflects it. And that reflection is what influences how a man responds to her. If she is emotionally reactive, he feels pressure. If she is emotionally unstable, he feels confusion. But if she is emotionally grounded, he feels respect. And respect is what keeps a man emotionally anchored. Now listen closely to this part. And when a woman says, "I need consistency, not confusion," she is not being demanding. She is being clear about emotional compatibility. And clarity helps a man self-evaluate. It allows him to understand whether he can meet that standard or not. And that is healthy in any relationship. Because relationships should not exist in confusion. They should exist in clarity, where both people understand what is needed to maintain connection. Now here's the deeper truth. A man does not only remember what a woman says, he remembers how she says it. He remembers the emotional tone behind her words. He remembers whether she spoke from insecurity or from self-awareness. He remembers whether she was trying to control or simply express. And that memory shapes his perception of her over time. So when a woman communicates from a place of self-respect, calmness, and clarity, she does not just influence the moment, she influences the memory. And that is where long-term perception is formed. Because at the end of the day, a man sees a woman as a queen, not because she demands it, not because she forces it, but because she consistently communicates in a way that reflects emotional strength, self-worth, and calm confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something that most people don't fully understand about relationships and emotional connection. And a man may forget many things you say in the heat of a moment, but he will never forget how you make him feel about himself when you speak to him with respect, clarity, and emotional control. And that is where true influence begins, not in loud words, not in emotional pressure, but in calm, intentional communication. Because when a woman learns how to speak in a way that strengthens a man instead of challenging his ego unnecessarily, something powerful happens. He starts to associate her presence with emotional balance. And men are naturally drawn to emotional balance even if they don't always know how to explain it. Now listen carefully, because this is where transformation happens in how a man sees a woman. When a woman speaks from insecurity, she often tries to prove her value. She over-explains. She repeats herself. She tries to force understanding. But when a woman speaks from confidence, she does not chase understanding, she communicates it. And there is a huge difference between those two energies. A man does not respect emotional pressure, but he does respect emotional clarity, because clarity removes confusion, and confusion is one of the biggest disruptors in any connection. So when a woman calmly says what she needs without emotional overload, she is not losing power, she is actually gaining it, because she is showing that she does not need chaos to be heard, and she does not need arguments to be understood. She does not need emotional breakdowns to express herself. She simply speaks, and that is enough. And that is what elevates her presence in a man's mind. Now let's go deeper. A man begins to see a woman differently when her communication reflects emotional self-control. Because emotional self-control signals maturity, and maturity creates respect. A woman who can remain calm while expressing disappointment is far more impactful than a woman who speaks only through emotional reaction. Because reaction creates tension, but calm expression creates understanding. And understanding is what builds emotional safety. Now, here's something very important that many people miss. A man does not just evaluate what a woman says to him. He evaluates how emotionally stable he feels while listening to her. If communication feels like constant emotional pressure, he begins to withdraw. But if communication feels balanced, grounded, and clear, he begins to lean in. Because men are not only attracted to beauty, they are attracted to peace. And peace is not created by silence. It is created by emotional control and communication. Now, when a woman expresses appreciation in a calm and genuine way, it has a deep psychological effect on a man. Something as simple as acknowledging effort without exaggeration can strengthen emotional connections significantly. And because men often operate in a world where effort is expected but not always recognized. So when recognition comes without manipulation, without expectation, without emotional debt attached to it, it feels real. And when something feels real to a man, he values it more deeply. But here is where balance becomes important. Appreciation does not mean lowering standards. A woman can appreciate a man's effort and still maintain her emotional boundaries. She can acknowledge what he does well and still be clear about what she needs to feel emotionally secure. And when both of those things exist together, it creates emotional structure in the relationship. And structure is something men respect, even if they do not immediately adjust to it. Now let's go deeper into communication style. When a woman speaks with calm confidence, she does not compete for emotional space. She occupies it naturally. She does not need to interrupt or dominate conversations to be heard. She does not need to repeat herself multiple times to be understood. Her presence alone carries weight because her communication is consistent, and consistency builds trust. Because a man starts to realize that he is not dealing with emotional unpredictability. He is dealing with someone who understands herself, someone who does not shift emotionally every time something small happens, and someone who can express concern without creating chaos. And that kind of stability becomes rare in his experience. Now, here is something deeper. A man begins to elevate how he sees a woman when she communicates her needs without losing her dignity. When she can say, "This matters to me," without sounding desperate. When she can say, "I expect consistency," without sounding controlling. When she can say, "This is important for me," emotionally, without emotional breakdown. Because that is the difference between emotional expression and emotional instability. And men respond very differently to those two things. Emotional instability creates distance. Emotional expression with control creates respect. Now let's talk about emotional leadership. A woman who leads her communication emotionally does not wait for things to become a problem before speaking. She addresses things early, calmly, and clearly. She does not accumulate emotional frustration and then release it all at once. Instead, she communicates as things arise, and that prevents emotional buildup. Because emotional buildup is what turns small issues into large conflicts. But when communication is steady, honest, and grounded, issues remain manageable. And a man begins to see that relationship as easier to maintain, not because it has no challenges, but because communication is healthy. Healthy communication is rare enough to be valuable. Now here is the final layer of understanding. A man does not just see a woman as a queen because of what she demands. He sees her that way because of how she carries herself in communication, because how a woman speaks reveals how she sees herself. And when she sees herself with respect, calmness, and clarity, she naturally teaches others how to see her, not through force, not through pressure, but through consistency in how she communicates her value, her needs, and her emotional standards. And that is what stays in a man's mind long after the conversation is over. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about something that changes everything in how a man perceives a woman. And it has nothing to do with perfection, nothing to do with pretending, and nothing to do with playing games. It has everything to do with emotional authority. The way a woman carries herself when she speaks, the way she expresses her expectations, and the way she maintains her self-respect in communication is what determines whether a man simply likes her or deeply respects her. Because attraction can happen quickly, but respect is built slowly. And respect is what makes a man see a woman as someone valuable, someone grounded, someone different from the rest. Now listen carefully. When a woman communicates from emotional authority, she is not begging to be understood. She is not chasing validation. She is not trying to convince a man of her worth. She's expressing herself from a place where her value is already known to her. And that changes everything in how her words are received. A man can sense when a woman is speaking from insecurity versus when she is speaking from self-assurance.